when they don't see it that way and they act in a way that isn't in accordance with how we see it, like leave the dishes in the sink, to use your example, we then add meaning to that. And it often has meaning about how much they care about us, how much they respect us. And so that story gets added to it, and then we feel hurt. We think it's because of the dishes in the sink, but we don't realize it's because of the whole story that we made up about the dishes in the sink. Or even, I go to the, really want to make it really clear, like even if, like let's say Angus was intentionally leaving dishes in the sink to hurt me, right? Like he decided he was mad at me and wanted to hurt me by doing that. Like if it was personal, on his level, it would be personal, but how I experience that has got nothing to do with him. Like if he was doing that, and if I wasn't taking it personally, I would see like, wow, Angus is suffering so much that he wants to hurt me in this way. Like what's going on with Angus that he would do that? Because I would know that that isn't his natural state. But if I'm taking that personally, I'm going to be like, game on, take that, right? And I'll be like, I'll see your dishes and raise you some laundry or whatever it is. But it's like, we don't catch it. Often we just get into it and we don't realize that we're in that power struggle escalation, or that escalation of wanting to be understood, but not being able to really communicate.
Välkommen till podden Human Change med Daniel Magnusson. Fastnar du ofta i tankar kring oro, stress och irritation? Tror du att allt beror på att det är fel på dig? Då vill jag välkomna dig till podden som guidar dig till förståelse om hur vi människor fungerar egentligen. Genom denna förståelse kan vi leva ett liv fullt av kärlek och harmoni. Ditt ljus och hopp när allt verkar mörkt och hopplöst. Så låt nu Daniel guida dig till den stillhet vi alla letar efter. Där slutstationen är välmående och glädje. Lyssna och njut.
Du lyssnar på Human Change med mig, Daniel Magnusson, and I will really quick change to English because today I have two English-speaking guests, and they are also a couple. And this is the first time I am interviewing two people at the same time in this podcast. And I'm really happy to have the guests here because I listened into their podcast like in the beginning of spring, maybe 2022. And it's called the Rewilding Love podcast. And yeah, we're going to go into that really soon. So before I go on further in this, I would like to say very welcome to Angus and Rohini Ross. Nice to have you here.
Thank you. We're very happy to be here.
Yeah, thanks, Daniel. It's a real pleasure to be here. So
good.
I'm looking forward to this conversation.
We've already had so much fun already before we started recording, so we know we're going to have a good time.
I hope so. Now everything changes when I push the record button. So you are a couple, and you also have a both a practice together and then also the separate practice. But the practice you have together, you are focusing on couples and helping couples, rewilding love, as the name of your podcast also.
Yes.
So tell me what's behind the Rewilders.
He's going to start.
Well, I think you're always good at starting. So
I'll start.
I'm going to bow down to your greater ability on that front.
Yeah.
Well, first of all, we love to use the metaphor of rewilding because it comes from nature, the term rewilding, and people often will recognize that nature can be rewilded back to its natural state. And there's lots of different examples of that. One of the examples that Angus shared with me, which is behind the name, the Rewilders, is what happened to Yellowstone Park here in the US when a pack of wolves were introduced to Yellowstone Park after being absent from it for hundreds of years. And just the incredible ripple effect that happened in the natural environment from just that one simple reintroduction. And when Angus was telling me about this experience, we watched the short video on YouTube. I said, well, that's what we do with people. We help to rewild them back to their natural state of love. And so that's where the metaphor started. And I think it is so powerful for us to all recognize that no matter how much we get caught up, no matter how much suffering we get into within ourselves, that we all have the capacity to come back to that natural state of love that is within us, that is who we are. No matter what gets in the way of that, it doesn't disappear. And it's not that difficult to reignite the experience of it. And the image that comes to my mind is even when in nature, humans put concrete down, there's always going to be cracks that start to show up, and flowers, weeds, whatever life force will start to shine through it. And that life force, that intelligence is who we are. And it's always looking to express. And it doesn't matter how strong our psychological defenses might have gotten over the years. There's always cracks in that. And that true nature is always looking for ways to express more fully in the world.
Yeah, and I think it is the potential of this metaphor is wonderful, because I feel like, you look at the natural world as a reference point, and there are so many instances that are glaringly obvious that there is an intelligence behind life that is continuously looking to create balance and harmony. It's continuously looking to evolve in the best possible way. So you can use the reference point of Yellowstone as a beautiful example, but that same life force, that intelligence is also coursing through our veins. It's looking to restore balance. It's looking to restore harmony. It's looking for us all to grow in the best possible way. And I think to be able to really sort of settle into that awareness is really helpful. But we are ideally creating a link between what's happening in these reference points in the natural world to what's happening in our own psychology. Our own psychology is equipped with this innate intelligence that's constantly looking to create an experience of balance and harmony. So if I can settle into that and see the value of that, then there's something so reassuring about that we continue to use this as a very applicable metaphor. And I think that, we can take it, we can start off in a way where perhaps it looks fairly simplistic, but it's something that we feel can go really deep.
Yeah. And it's for that recognition on an individual level, but with the couples that we work with, what we do is we help each one of them reconnect with that innate intelligence that they have within themselves, help them to feel safer within themselves through that experience. And as a result of that, there's this natural ability to have an open-hearted experience with their partner. And we're really clear that our responsibility is not to be attached to the outcome of a relationship, that our commitment is to do our best to help each person in the relationship connect with that space within themselves, and then for them to then see what happens. Just like the wolves in Yellowstone Park, they were introduced and there were all kinds of ripple effects. As we help individuals reconnect with that space within themselves, then they get to see what the ripple effects are in their relationship and in every area of their life.
Yeah, so beautiful explained, both the metaphor with the rewilding and how that is in us also. That what I hear is also that when we come in contact with the true nature of us, it's more easy for us to have the compassion for people and people's struggle, and more easy to see when people are suffering and really doing the best in the moment to I don't know, survive in some sense. And what I love also I love a lot of things with you guys, but if I I only know you through the podcast, but it feels like I know you because you're very open and really synced and vulnerable and open when you talk, both in the podcast, in the intros, and the snippets between the different kind of sessions. So for you who listen now and haven't listened to the podcast, I can of course really, really recommend it, because it's very different style of a podcast, because it's more like a, I don't know, a reality show thing, because you have actually recorded a lot of sessions with a couple, both individually and as a couple in the same session, and then you have put that into different kind of episodes, and then you reflect before and then during and so on, and it's that in itself got me as a listener a way to tag along during your session. And it's like, yeah, I want to do couples. I want to coach couples. Like, yay. I want to like talk to my wife, like, hey, we can coach couples. And she's not in the business at all, right? So, but it's really, really nice way, in a different way of listening to a podcast, because otherwise usually it's like interviews or just someone talking. But in this case, it's like it's like a really show, like a show. Right? I really like that.
Oh, that's great.
How did you come up with that idea?
Well, can I say that I came up with the idea?
You may say that you came up. Actually, yeah, you can say that, because I was very doubtful that it was even viable. So yeah, go ahead. I think that
take the honor.
take all the props and kudos for having that brilliant idea.
Well, I think part of what had me thinking about this is that we also train practitioners. We also have a limited amount of time that we can do the work that we do with couples. We maybe do, at the most 3 intensives a month, usually 2. And so there's a limited number of couples that we're going to work with one-on-one. And I was thinking about, how do we have our work impact more people? How can we share this understanding in a way that supports more people, and also supports people without them having to pay anything for it? That's a free offering. And so as I was reflecting on that, I thought, wow, wouldn't it be great to work with a couple and to debrief what we're pointing to as part of the rewilding process, part of the reconnecting with our true nature. And so I shared this with Angus, and as often is the case, less so now, I think, but he led with a no.
I don't think I led with a no, but I led with suspicion that this is going to have some potential.
Well, you had all the.
Well, I think it had potential. I just was concerned. Apart from anything else, I didn't think anybody else would agree to sort of be so vulnerable in a way where, what they brought to the table was astonishing. So.
Yeah. So there was he led with all of the things that could go wrong or wouldn't work, which is one of the things that we've learned to navigate in our relationship, because often I would take that personally, but I don't think I did that time. And I think I could feel the inspiration in the idea, and I've learned to trust that feeling of inspiration. And so when you're right, you didn't say no, you just said everything why it wouldn't work. And so I thought, well, that's fine, because that doesn't bother me. And so I said, okay, we can go ahead. And I would say within a few weeks after that, we had the couple show up. It was very soon after that.
Yeah. I mean, there is another funny part to this conversation. I think that I had sort of outlined all the ways that this could go horribly wrong and wouldn't work. But it got to a point where we needed to buy and invest in the technology. So this was a while back. So it was coming up, and we're coming up to Black Friday here in the US, which is the day after Thanksgiving. There are all these incredible sales, and you get these extraordinary deals. So I thought, well, if we're going to do it, we're going to pull the trigger. It's now or never, because we kind of got to that point at this time of year when we had to make that decision. So basically what happened is like, oh, there is the technology. It looks like it's almost half price. Let's pull the trigger, buy it now. And then, of course, we have the technology. And in my mind, now we have to do it.
And then Angus actually found the couple. You found the couple.
Did I?
Yeah.
Did I really?
Yeah. It was from someone that you spoke with.
Gosh, it's so long ago now.
Yeah.
I feel like you're going to have to jog my memory. I don't want you to waste time trying to jog my memory.
But anyway, it all worked out.
Take the honor.
Yeah, it is a combined effort.
It was a combined effort.
We'll certainly agree on that.
And it just all fell into place. And that's another thing that I've learned to trust as well, is that you follow the inspiration and then you basically see what the feedback is. And the feedback was that, yes, it was a go. And then, of course, as you're saying, it's more like a reality show. So to do a podcast like that takes an incredible amount of preparation. So I had to re-listen to the recordings, and I did that part of it. And so that was a whole learning curve for me in terms of how do we take these hours and hours of recordings and actually find the parts that will help us to tell the story of the couple in an effective way, but also be useful as teaching points for pointing to what we're sharing with them. So that was a labor of love. And then once that was done, then you and I started the recording process, which was a learning curve for our relationship too. And if you listen to the podcast, you'll hear a lot of that learning curve because we share it.
For sure.
But it was fun. I'm so glad we did it. And we're as we said to you, Daniel, we're looking at season 2 and deciding what direction to go for season 2.
Yeah. So when did you record when did you have the sessions with the couple? Was it in 2020 or 2019? Or?
I'm just trying to think how long ago that was now.
It's one of those years. I don't know which one.
Yeah, I don't know. It feels like it must be 3 years ago.
So maybe 2019.
I guess so, yeah.
Maybe 2019.
Yeah.
Oh, we shouldn't say anything.
The spoiler alert.
Yeah, spoiler alert.
I know.
Yeah, and interesting thing, even if that was a spoiler alert or a spoiler, you could really follow along and could also see that was not like just a straight line and like come and see you and then and then everything was good, right?
Yeah, I mean, we knew that we had something for sure. So, I mean, I think that, we talk about it being hours and hours, but it was certainly recorded over, the typical sort of 4-day format where we would do an intensive. So it was remarkable that they agreed to let us do that in the first place. But it was certainly sequential in the way that you would do an intensive. We would begin, let's say, on a Thursday evening and we'd finish on a Sunday morning. So it followed the sequence of the intensives and we recorded every session. So it's kind of remarkable that, that things unfolded in the way that they did, but we knew we had something pretty special just by virtue of the fact of how well the intensive went. And that there were these significant arc points where each one of them had quite a good insight. And obviously got to a pretty good place. Don't want to give too much away, but we knew we had something just by virtue of how well the intensive had gone. And I guess we got lucky, we found someone, they agreed to do it. And who knows, not everybody has an insight. For the most part, they do. But it was certainly a case where we felt very happy that we managed to capture that.
Mm.
Mm. So what would you say is the biggest challenge with working with couples?
I don't know that there's a specific challenge to couples. I think that it's more working with humans in the sense that we create an environment that we hope will support them with feeling safe and being willing to be open and vulnerable. And we have to see what happens. We have to step into the unknown with them, and we can do our best to point people to their true nature, to who they are, and to what gets in the way of all of us experiencing that. But we have no idea what their level of openness is necessarily going to be, what their capacity to integrate that is going to be. So it's really an opportunity. I don't know if it's a challenge, but I think it's always fun that we have to step into the unknown and see how far we can get with the experience. And it's always a discovery process.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the direction that we are looking in, I wouldn't say that we have an agenda. Maybe I do, I don't know. But you certainly want to sort of create a very safe container where each person feels like they can be vulnerable, that they can try that hat on for size. And hopefully there's a reciprocity that happens there where the other partner actually is able to sort of hear that from a place of compassion. So they can feel like there's a very delicate balance to it. But we are absolutely doing everything in our power to create, as I say, this safe container where each person feels like, yeah, I can take off that cloak that's sort of keeping me safe, or break down that wall of protection that sort of doesn't allow me under normal circumstances to be so vulnerable. And that's kind of what you're really focusing on, is like, how do we dismantle that wall that is so evident when the intensive begins? And it is about, for us, just creating a very safe container. And the magic really kind of happens once that wall is down, and each person can show up from a place of compassion and hear and witness, whatever, quite often there may be some trauma involved. It's being able to sort of create a situation where each person can kind of really hear and witness the other person's voice or feelings in a place of safety, as I say.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And with the experience, it's the wall that Angus is talking about that is often evident between the couple when they start meeting with us on that first meeting. As Angus says, they bring out their laundry list of woes in that first session, as we do, intake and really hear what's going on with the two of them and what they'd like to get out of the experience. But then we do a lot of one-on-one work, and that wall really is just a way that each one of them learns to take care of themselves and protect themselves. But the reality is the pain is coming from within their own mind. It's coming from their own misunderstandings and limiting beliefs. And it's so easy to blame our partner for that. I mean, I still do that to this day sometimes before I catch myself. But it so often looks like someone else is causing us to feel a certain way. And we can really miss that actually what's happening is we're feeling our own self-judgment and our own limiting beliefs about ourselves. And that doesn't mean what the other person is doing is acceptable or okay. That's I want to be really clear about that. I'm not saying anything goes in how we treat each other in relationships, but our emotional suffering really is a reflection of what we're buying into in our own consciousness. And for me, waking up to that and seeing the truth in that so that we can have greater freedom, greater internal healing and growth, so that we don't have to identify with those misunderstandings in the same way. Like, that is just what I love about this work, is supporting people with getting that perspective within themselves and realizing then that wall that they've been using to try and stop themselves hurting is actually not even in the right place. That's right. And that they can actually have choice over whether or not they buy into their own limiting beliefs, right? Like, if I'm thinking I'm worthless, I'm not good enough, I'm not even realizing that I'm buying into that. Angus says something to me, I feel hurt. It looks like it's what he said to me that has hurt my feelings. But really the intermediary is, he said something, my thinking has got stirred up about what that means about me. I'm feeling the impact of those thoughts. Like, what's wrong with me that I'm married to someone that says that to me? Who am I? All of that's so fast and so invisible, but that's where my experience is coming from. And so any wall that I build up to try and protect myself from him isn't going to work, because I'm still stuck with my own thinking, and I'm still stuck with those habitual patterns that I've learned over the years to try and protect myself. And so the more perspective I can get on that, the more perspective we can help our clients get on that, it's so liberating. And I'm sure you've experienced this yourself with your clients. Like that is such a gift, to be able to recognize that there are no enemies. And even the enemy of our own mind isn't really an enemy. It's just an innocent misunderstanding. And can we have a different perspective on that, so that we naturally have greater love and compassion, first and foremost for ourselves, and then that ripples out into the relationship.
Yeah. And our greatest joy is always to see that wall come tumbling down. And, that's the moment of insight. And it will be a case where they've kind of found a different vantage point. They've suddenly become aware of the content of their experience, their thinking. They can see now this is no longer a blind spot. They're getting caught up in the ways that they have traditionally got caught up. And they're now seeing it from a different vantage point. They're seeing it from that place inside that really is a more settled and sweet spot, where they have a whole different lens on what's going on. So for me, it is so wonderful to see how they just suddenly have that moment where they get to see, yeah, you know what, there has been this wall. It has been a blind spot. This is my thinking. This is me being unaware of all of my programming and conditioning that has led me to this point. And now that I can see and separate that from myself, I can show up in a place from compassion and perhaps figure out a way to heal this relationship that has been so much been kind of held to ransom by that programming and conditioning that has been a blind spot for all these years. So for us, it's that recognition, wow, they've seen that wall fall down and they're now seeing it with much clearer eyes.
Yeah. Can I say one other? I know we're talking a lot, but can I say one other thing?
That's why you're here.
That recognition is so powerful. And this is why we're not attached to the outcome of relationship, because we know that as long as that's a blind spot for somebody, it doesn't matter what relationship they're in, that's going to show up in its own way. And so as soon as that blind spot is less of a blind spot, I think there's an infinite amount of revealing that can happen. But as soon as we have less of a blind spot in that area and we understand what we're really up against is the misunderstandings in our own mind, then every relationship, whether the one that they're in now stays together or not, or it makes sense from a place of love to move on and not be together, that every relationship is going to be impacted by that. And not just romantic relationships, all relationships are going to be impacted by that, whether it's at work, whether it's with friends, whether it's with family. When we really start to see where our experience comes from and the role that our own thinking plays in that, and how we can have a different relationship with those personal thoughts and greater respect for the deeper intelligence of who we are, and to rest in that, to fall into that space, to surrender into that deeper intelligence. I mean, to me, that's just an invitation that I want to keep accepting over and over again, even though I keep forgetting over and over again. But just to remember that that is who we are, that feeling of love and peace and well-being and being okay, that is the truth. And that everything that isn't that is what we make up along the way. And even if there's difficult circumstances in life, our experience differs depending on the filter of thought that we have on it. And our capacity to navigate challenging experiences differs based on how much of a filter of thought we've got on it and what we're identifying within ourselves and what we're looking to within ourselves for our guidance and the inner prompting.
Makes me think we should put a sell-on clause in our contract.
A what?
A sell-on
What's
clause.
that?
It's like if you were a football team, you maybe sell a player, and then every time the player got sold on, they would get a fee.
Okay.
I'm saying that this understanding is the gift that keeps on giving. So we say, yeah, we're working in relationship, but it can bear incredible fruit in the working environment on all sorts of different levels. So I feel like it is a gift, and we're just happy for them to see what we are offering in terms of let's take this wall down and see it from that vantage point. So yeah, they hopefully will figure out a way to enjoy their marriage, but maybe they won't. Maybe they will have to part company from a place of honesty and neutrality and truth, and yet here is this understanding. It's going to be really valuable to them in life.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because we can see ripples, the effect of it, the understanding in different areas, of course, as you say, in workplace and other relationship, both with ourselves and others. And as I see it, it's life gets easier to live, or simpler, or more fun, and it doesn't mean that there's no mental suffering sometimes, or challenges in life, or we just like, it's not neglecting or shying away from things. It's just like, okay, more of an acceptance, I guess.
Yeah.
That's another reason that I like the term rewilding, because what you're saying, it doesn't mean that all of a sudden we never have mental or emotional suffering as part of our human existence. But I think when we realize that through opening up to all of who we are, that means being open to the fullness of our emotional experience. And it's through being present to our experience, not trying to bypass it, escape it, or change our experience or improve our experience, which is what I tried to do for so many years, is trying to improve my experience. It's simply by allowing ourselves to be open to the full range of our human experience that we have a deeper understanding, knowing of who we are beyond our experience. We're not just our thoughts and feelings. There is this infinite, formless essence of who we are within which all of that takes place. And as humans, it's like we can't understand that with our intellectual minds, but we can certainly get a feeling for what it's like to surrender into that, to relax into that, to identify more with the impersonal nature of who we are and less with all of our personal thinking, and that comes from our, biological brain and our attempts to try and survive, and to really feel the safety that's available within us, even in a world and in a life that is constantly changing, and where we can't really ever find safety in the way that we are often looking to find safety. But there's that space within us that we can really trust and relax into, that allows us to navigate this fragile human experience, like you're saying, with more joy, more lightheartedness, more fun, but not just that, right? The full range, more aliveness is what I would say. We get to live our human experience with more of the aliveness of what it is to be human.
Yeah. I feel like we've self-programmed to sort of really act out from the experience of, I don't know what you would say, being triggered or having a moment where we would say get caught up, and that there is a real shift that can be available where we start to realize, there is this part of me, there is this life force inside of me that's always looking towards balance and harmony, as is reflected and referenced in nature. I am not separate from that. That is part of my makeup as a human being. There is this part of me that's always trying to restore balance and harmony. It is balance and harmony. And yet we are programmed, self-programmed. We're programmed by society. We program ourselves to sort of find ourselves in a situation where we just act in a very sort of immediate way because of some trauma that may have happened in our past. We have this coping mechanism that we might respond to certain situations, sometimes with anger, sometimes with sadness, sometimes with theatrics. I don't know. But for me, it's just starting to recognize the indicators of that and to realize that's just me responding to my old conditioning, my old programming. And that the shift is there's that, but there's also this part of me that's constantly looking towards balance and harmony. There is that part of me that is balance and harmony. That is my innate, natural, essential self. And that's why we love this term, the rewilding, because it's kind of like it's helping people get back to who they are. Who they are is this life force that's looking constantly towards balance and harmony, because it is balance and harmony. It is well-being. It's something that's innate within each and every one of us. And yet we've allowed ourselves to be led by our programming and conditioning and think that's where we should take our lead from. And that is the misunderstanding. And that for me that is the beauty, as you say, of rewilding, as I see it. Mm.
And also, there's nothing wrong with our programming and conditioning. I think that is all part of the learning curve that we're on as humans. Every single one of us makes up meaning along the way as part of life, and that we make up a limited meaning because we only have a limited perspective. But it's through the living of that we wake up to more of that. So it's not even that conditioning is a bad thing, but waking up to it and seeing its conditioning and recognizing that it's limited and seeing that there's more to see that isn't just that one vantage point can be really helpful. And I'm saying that because I spent so long thinking that my growth was to get rid of conditioned thinking or to overcome limiting beliefs, and to somehow think that my intellect could fix what the intellect has created, and it can't do that. And so to be able to see that there's nothing wrong with the intellect doing what it does, there's nothing wrong with my survival instincts creating up the best meaning that they can to try and help me feel safe in the world, even though it's limited. But in living that limited experience, I bump up against the misunderstandings. And in that bumping up against the misunderstandings, I get to see more. And that's where I really love relationship work, because I think intimate relationships are one of the most powerful vehicles for spiritual growth that are out there. Because we're like, if we're really open-hearted and in the intimacy of a relationship, we are going to come up against our misunderstandings. We are going to come up against our limiting beliefs. It is not going to be fun all of the time. It is going to be painful at times. But that's, I've heard other people talk about is like the sandpapering of relationship. Like that's the beauty of what relationship gives us. It gives us the opportunity to learn how to love each other better by overcoming those misunderstandings. And it's through seeing beyond the conditioning that we get better at loving. We get better at loving ourselves. We get better at loving each other. We get better at loving the planet, everyone else in our lives. Like we just get better at being able to express love in the world through working it through and, what you might call the messy way of working it through in relationship. But I don't think there's anything messy about it. I think it's just all part of the natural unfolding. And that there's a lot of misunderstanding out there, I think, about relationships. I know here in the US, I think 50% of marriages end in divorce here. And again, I'm not saying that people shouldn't get divorced, but I think that often when people are in that stage of feeling the hurt and the suffering of coming up against their limiting beliefs, they think it's a relationship problem rather than an opportunity to see something more deeply. And so what we say is like, don't end the relationship at that point. See what's being shown to you. Get back to the natural state of love that is who you are. And from that place, decide whether or not you want the relationship to continue. And if at that place it makes sense for it to end, that's completely something that we would trust. But that, and Angus and I share from our lived experience. I mean, I spent a lot of time thinking that there was something wrong with our relationship because of the conflict that we had in our relationship. I felt like our relationship needed to be fixed rather than recognizing that I simply was blaming Angus for my suffering innocently, not understanding where my suffering was really coming from. And of course, he then felt criticized because I'm blaming him for my suffering, experiencing it as a criticism, and then he's in his hurt. And so it's just so common what we lived. And it's something that is not, it's not complex to figure out. It's not necessarily easy, but it's not difficult in terms of complexity. It's quite simple, but it does take a willingness to really genuinely get curious about where our experience comes from and what we're up against when we're in suffering.
Yeah, we had many years of a much more abrasive grade of sandpaper. I think that's the way to look at it.
We have a softer sandpaper now.
We do. We have a nice pearlized glow about our relationship.
That's true. It comes in different grades, doesn't it, sandpaper?
You're up in the high numbers now, 240
yeah,
or something like that. It's like really soft.
Yeah.
That's right. It's almost soft to the touch.
Yeah. So yeah, and I think it's so easy to blame the other party in a relationship or the relationship in itself, because that's what we in some way believing that we are experiencing when we having an argument, or but she said, he said, or whatever, and going for it. And in relationship, we are suddenly starting to be with someone else and learning to get to know someone else, and then let them know us. And it's a way of, I don't know, start learning each other and building a relationship, and then happy glory, and you're full of hormones and everything is new and exciting, of course. And after a while, it's like, now they don't pick up their clothes anymore. Or I hate people when they put dishes in the sink? How can't they see how I want it? And we have these limiting beliefs or beliefs, of course, and believe that this is the way everybody should do or not do, and not seeing that and understanding. It's so easy for us to believe, of course, they see the same thing. We look at the same thing, or
and that's so true, that we see the world in one way and think that everyone sees the world in that way innocently often, and that when they don't see it that way and they act in a way that isn't in accordance with how we see it, like leave the dishes in the sink, to use your example, we then add meaning to that. And it often has meaning about how much they care about us, how much they respect us. And so that story gets added to it, and then we feel hurt. We think it's because of the dishes in the sink, but we don't realize it's because of the whole story that we've made up about the dishes in the sink. Or even I go to the, really want to make it really clear, like, even if, like, let's say Angus was intentionally leaving dishes in the sink to hurt me, right? Like he was mad at me and wanted to hurt me by doing that. Like, if it was personal, on his level, it would be personal, but how I experience that has got nothing to do with him. Like, if he was doing that, and if I wasn't taking it personally, I would see, like, wow, Angus is suffering so much that he wants to hurt me in this way. Like, what's going on with Angus that he would do that? Because I would know that that isn't his natural state. But if I'm taking that personally, I'm going to be like, game on, take that, right? And I'll be like, I'll see your dishes and raise you some laundry or whatever it is. But it's like, we don't catch it. Often we just get into it, and we don't realize that we're in that power struggle escalation, or that escalation of wanting to be understood, but not being able to really communicate in a way that we can be understood by a partner. And so that's why it looks so complex. Like, there's so many variables that are involved. But when we simplify it and recognize, like, if we can bring it back to our experience is not coming from outside of ourselves, can we take care of ourselves in a way that recognizes that? So if I'm in distress and it's not coming from the dishes in the sink, or whatever Angus said to me, whatever it looks like it's coming from, if it's coming from my own state of mind and the narrative that I'm making up, then I know how to take care of myself, because I know what's causing my suffering. And I know that if I let my mind settle, and if I leave that narrative alone, and if I remember that I am peace and well-being and that intelligence, if I can come back into that remembering, then everything's going to be different, and I'm not going to be suffering. There may still be dishes in the sink, but I'm not going to be suffering anymore. And from that place, I can figure out more effectively how to navigate whatever the logistics are. Like, people are so incredibly resourceful when they're in a good state of mind, when they're settled and connected with that innate wisdom that they have within themselves. I feel like they can navigate any logistical challenge that comes up in a relationship. But when we're caught up in misunderstanding, when we're caught up in our painful thinking, I said to someone recently, I said, like, I can't even figure out how to tie my shoe when I'm in that state of mind, tie my shoelaces up. Like, I can barely figure anything out, let alone a problem in our relationship. And it's not the relationship problem that's difficult. It's the state of mind that we're trying to solve the problem from that really matters. And I think that that's one of the things that we see with couples when they come to us, is that they've spent so much time and experienced so much pain trying to solve things from a low state of mind, from a low mood. And they feel so hopeless because they're not making any progress. And in fact, it's often feeling like things are getting worse. And they think it's the relationship is so bad. And they don't understand that it's, no, you've just been going about it when you're not seeing things clearly, when you've forgotten who you are, when you're not at your best. And that when the two of you are settled and open-hearted and at your best, we're confident that it's not us that's going to help you figure this out, that you have the answers inside of you to figure it out. And our responsibility is to help you get into that state of mind the best that we can, so that you can see that for yourselves. And then, it's common sense for the most part what needs to happen.
Yeah, I mean, I think that this is, I mean, obviously this is the most important place for us to point. But going back to Daniel, what you're talking about when people come together, for me, it's almost like they get a reprieve from that programming and conditioning that often when we're in a low mood, that programming and conditioning becomes really problematic. So a couple meet for the first time. There's that sort of old adage, blinded by love. It's not a term that we might use, but it is, in a sense, they're getting an opportunity to sort of forget their programming and conditioning because they're so enthralled with this other person. They're so much in the present moment. And that present moment is intoxicating. It makes us feel it's so life affirming and wonderful. And we feel so ebullient, etc. All the superlatives I can think of. And then what happens is the mood shifts for whatever reason. And who knows why that mood shifts? Someone gets into a low mood and that old programming and conditioning resurfaces. And yes, now we're in a situation where our ego is like, oh, there's someone else we can add to the narrative. Yes, it looks like they are the culprit. It's their problem. It's not anything to do with me. And so what we're trying to sort of really address is like, no, it's all about state of mind. It's all about state of mind and how it affects your thinking. And the thinking is going to be reflective of that state of mind. And of course, yes, all of that old programming and conditioning will reemerge. But I feel like, and this is kind of like the way that I like to talk about the ego is always looking for someone to pin that on. It's always looking for a reason, and the ego will always externalize that reason. So we're trying to sort of re-educate in a way where, no, it's nothing to do with that. It's about the state of mind you might find yourself in. And in a low mood, you will go back to that old original narrative in a heartbeat. But it's nothing to do with the other party. It's purely to do with your state of mind. And that is such a game changer and so difficult for people to sort of entertain in an intellectual way. They've got to have a real experience of what we're pointing to. And that in a sense, is what insight is.
Yeah.
Yeah, because when that happened, when the old programming and all the beliefs is kicking in, we start in that sense when it's about suffering and all that, it's like we're finding ways to protect ourselves, and then it's going to be more easy to point at other people, for example, if we have that tendency. And of course, some people have the tendency to beat themselves up and blame themselves and
absolutely.
so on. And like, I know. How can anyone love me? I mean, I'm so worthless. And going down that hole. So
and in a sense, that's the ego just trying to find something to hang the meaning on. It's either them or it's me, but it's even though it's going towards ourselves, it's still an externalization in a sense that we're just trying to find that meaning. And when we can see that for what it is, and recognize that it's just part of our coping mechanisms, like you're saying, just part of our survival, trying to survive, but the being able to see it from the vantage point of compassion is such a game changer. It doesn't even need to stop, because it's probably never going to stop, but being able to recognize what it is so that we don't have to believe it, and we don't have to buy into it, like that's enough for it to not have the impact on our emotional level. And it allows us to then see what else is available beyond that meaning that gets made up by our intellect, and to see what's really true and available in relationship. And that when our safety and well-being isn't dependent on our partner, when that's coming from within ourselves, we're then able to show up in the relationship in a completely different way. And that was my experience in my relationship with Angus, is that I didn't realize how selfish I was being, but the way that I previously looked at the relationship is that I needed him to be a certain way so that I could feel safe, so that I would be okay. And so I focused on what we could do, what we could learn, how we could change so that I could feel safe in the relationship. And it wasn't until I realized that my safety doesn't come from him showing up in a certain way, not even him being in a good mood, not even him not being angry, that my safety wasn't taken away from me because he wasn't being nice in that moment, that my safety is inside of me, and that can never be taken away on an emotional level, that is something that resides within me. And that when I could feel myself being resourced by that and filled up by that, I was able to give in the relationship from the overflow, not look to what can the relationship give me? What can I take from the relationship? What is Angus going to do for me? It just became a natural overflow where I was able to show up differently in the relationship. I was able to show it with more compassion, even if he wasn't in a good mood, that I didn't need him to be in a good mood for me to show it with love. And that was so powerful. And it doesn't mean that I'm always able to do that, but the relationship became much more about each of us giving naturally from the overflow and having compassion for the other person when they weren't at their best, rather than seeing that as a fatal flaw that needed to be fixed. And I'll speak for myself, because I was probably one thinking that. I think you were always much more generous than I was. But to not be so scared by the other person's low mood and their low mood behavior, and to just be able to see it for what it is. It's like, oh, they're not themselves right now. They're caught up, they're suffering. This is what their behavior looks like when they do that. When that's not personal and I'm able to see it for what it is, I'm able to much more often meet that with love and care and kindness, which creates a whole different experience in the relationship than what we were experiencing previously, which was me meeting that with criticism and judgment and fear, and building that wall and having 1 foot out of the relationship to try and protect myself, rather than being 2 feet in and being like, I love you and you're having a bad day. What can I do? How can I help you?
It's just your thinking. I don't want to say that.
That's not what you say.
No.
We'll edit that out, I hope.
Yeah. That's like adding fuel to the fire.
Yeah.
That's right. Yeah, I mean, I think that that there's this opportunity that starts to unfold to see our partner's psychological innocence and start to recognize, yeah, you know what, they're caught up and they're coming from their programming and conditioning, and there's nothing really to take personally there. If I can really get eyes for that, then I feel like the natural horsepower, if you like, of that life force that is within me is compassion. So as soon as I see it from the vantage point of this is their programming and conditioning, they're reacting to that, this is their state of mind, there's nothing for me to take personally here. If I'm taking it personally, then I just get into this dance of death, as I like to say, where, you know, their trauma is kind of activating my trauma in a sense. So if I'm able to see that in the moment, I pivot to presence, and pivoting to presence is becoming present to that part of me that can look at it and see it for what it is. This is just a state of mind issue. And when I see that, invariably, I find myself showing up in a place of compassion. And that is where the magic happens. Certainly in the way that we would do an intensive, there will be that moment where someone gets eyes for that, sees the psychological innocence, shows up from a place of compassion, and then the other person who's all caught up has got really nothing to fight with. And I think that's why, for us, compassion is, as I like to say, the sacred source in relationship. It's like that's when healing begins. And it's coming from that place that, again, you know, sorry to sort of really beat this drum, that is that place that is looking to restore balance and harmony, because it is balance and harmony. It's continuously looking for that. And if we can invigorate, I don't know if that's the right way to articulate it. I was going to say to invigorate that within ourselves. It's kind of like it's already there. It never goes away. All we've got to do is just to awaken to it. And everything should just fall into place, because that's the nature of it. It's looking to harmonize at all times, because that's what life force does.
Yeah, I mean, really, on the simplest level, there's the experience of love and the experience of not love on some degree. It might be a little or it might be a lot of suffering. But when we recognize, the sooner I recognize that I'm now in some level of not love, then I have the capacity to understand, oh, I'm suffering and I've lost connection, or I've lost the feeling of who I am in this moment. And that really I need to put the oxygen mask on myself first. And that's the highest priority. And I think the more attuned we get to that suffering, like the feelings give us the feedback. I think what I've noticed for myself is that I'm much more aware of the subtleties of when I'm not in love, in that feeling of love. Like even today, Angus and I, we have a membership community and we do a monthly video. for the membership community. And our assistant emailed me, I think it was over the weekend, saying, oops, your video that goes out today, the first 9 minutes of it are out of focus. Because I just sent it to her. We recorded it. I sent it to her. And so I'm like, oh no, we got to re-record a video for the community. It's due today because it's our November video. And so I was a little stressed that, I thought we'd done it weeks ago and now we're doing it last minute. Angus could feel my tension and he started to, react in whatever way he was reacting to that. We got it done. We sent it off. It was all fine. But we were talking afterwards and as we were kind of just debriefing, and there was a real gentleness, even though we were talking about what happened. And Angus said, you get tense and then I react to your tension. And it's like, that would have been like an 8 out of 10 conversation before. Now it's just this conversation where we're able to really see, like, what can we do differently? How can we love each other better? What can I do? How can I show up in a kind of way for you? What would be more helpful? And in that debrief, it's not that we're saying we can't help each other. When we say our experience comes from within ourselves, it doesn't mean that we can't work better as a team. But starting from the premise of our experience coming from within ourselves makes that a very different conversation. So I was able to recognize, I was feeling tense because I didn't want to be late for our assistant. She was already having to do this last minute and I wanted to get it done. And so I wasn't as relaxed. And then Angus was able to take responsibility for his experience and how that perhaps was not supportive of us doing that. And we were able to approach it in a very practical way because of understanding where our experience comes from and able to make headway in a way that we might not have done in the past because it didn't escalate into anything.
Yeah. And I want to get more esoteric about this because I do feel that, that life force that we point to, and that's the term we're using today, or I'm using today. I do feel let's imagine that the horsepower of that life force is love, is compassion. And that, for me, when we talk about whether we're in love or out of love in the context that we're using, and it's not romantic, it's just we're talking about the feeling of that life force, if you like. For me, the opposite of that is fear. So you're either in fear, and fear is just a product of the conceptual mind. Fear is in the programming and conditioning. Fear is all the things that have happened to me throughout the course of my life. And I've created this monster narrative that I react from and get caught up and I react from that narrative. So it's kind of a case of like, which side of the coin am I going to? Am I going to love and compassion, or am I going to my fear? And that for me is really helpful. And this morning would be a classic example of, you're afraid that we're not going to get this done. And I'm afraid of something else. And then that's where we get into that, potentially that dance of death. And now we see it for what it is. It's just like, yes, this is a state of mind issue. And we are kind of both going to our old traumatic narrative in a way, in a small way. I mean, how wonderful that we can see that.
The little sandpaper.
The little sandpaper version. Yes. But for me, it's kind of like, that's helpful for me to think, it's either love, being the horsepower of that part of me that's always trying to restore balance and harmony, because it is balance and harmony, or it's my programming and conditioning that is so wrapped up in all the things that in my life I've been afraid of, that I have these coping mechanisms. So my coping mechanism for Rohini, traditionally, if she's getting tense, it comes across as a sort of flavor of impatience. I come out all guns a-blazing. I don't like impatience. It reminds me of my dad, whatever's going on for me. And then we kind of go back and forth. There's the dance of death. For me now, it's like, I get some altitude on what's going on. Fear and love. What's happening? I'm in fear. I'm not in love. Love, again, not being the romantic love, the love that, we're using as an example to sort of illustrate that feeling that is innate within each and every one of us.
Yeah. And we knew that we were doing this recording with you. And so we just had a conversation. It's like,
we had a fight purposefully.
No, we did. We said, we want to, how is the feeling between us? Like, we just had a check-in about where the feeling was at between us, because we wanted to, one, for ourselves, but also to show up for you in a space where we could be as clear as possible. And so that's why we had that conversation. And I'm really grateful that we did.
Yeah, good one.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that's one of the really good things with this understanding is that it usually the fight dance of death is not so long, right?
Yeah.
Compared to, I mean, I can only look for me and my relationship with my wife. It's before I could go home and hold on really long for like things that I think was wrong way of acting or outrageous or overreacting and all these kind of ideas I had. Now it's like, of course, sometimes I'm not enjoying it, but most of the time, both me and my wife, we let go of things much, much, much more easy. And and my wife is really clear and have more clarity sometimes when we are having an argument. And she said, "Okay, are you done? I'm done." And I was like, "Well, apparently you're not done, but I'm done." And then she turned her back on me. And I was like,
she's checking her watch.
Yeah. And I was like, okay, I have to let go there now. And like, yeah, but this is and then I was like, and she's like really on the point, like, well, I'm done. And that is so helpful because that in that moment when she says it, I see how I'm stuck. So it's helping me, and she's like really done with it when she said it. And so that's good. So how would you say, because sometimes when if someone is listening and in this case also my wife has the understanding, thanks to my pointing and my podcast, and also listening to other podcasts and books and hearing this, and it's, of course, we need an insight. We need to see the truth to where we point. Otherwise, it's not an intellectual buy-in. But so in this case, me and my wife has it. Both of you have it, and it's very okay. But if the other part, the other person in the relationship doesn't have it, do both need to see it? Or
so should I answer that? You look like you're sitting on the edge of your seat wanting to answer it, so I should let you go.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Well, for me, it's impossible to not have the understanding, because what we're pointing to is what's true for all of us. We all have that essential nature, and so it's never absent. We all are these unique expressions from that one source of formless energy. So that it's who we all are. How we articulate it, how we conceptualize that in our mind might be different, but I think that that's something that's very universal. And we all have a reference point for well-being. We all have a reference point for peace of mind. We all have a reference point for what it feels like to have an open heart. So it doesn't really matter what the language is that we use for that, is that we're pointing to something that's universal and can be understood by anyone, because we are that. And then in my experience, because I was very much under the impression that Angus needed to do all of the things that I was involved in for many years, and dragged him to many, many workshops and things. And I finally realized that my well-being wasn't dependent on him being in agreement with me, having to see things the same way that I saw them, and that my peace of mind really, truly came from inside of myself. And that shift within me, when he was like, fine, not to know anything about what I was up to in terms of my professional development at that point in time, our relationship changed without him really having any understanding in terms of what had happened to me. He knew that there was a change in me, but he didn't understand why I had changed. And he didn't need to, because all that happened was that I was living much more of the time in a nicer feeling within myself. And so I was behaving much more nicely toward him. And then that just, the ripple effect of that allowed our relationship to blossom. And that brought out more of the good in him and less of the more challenging behaviors. And so it didn't require him to know anything about it. It was just a very natural coming back to a nice feeling within the relationship. And it only took one of us to make that shift. And although we both shifted as a result.
Yeah, I mean, I think that reference point for us allows us to be confident about the fact that really we only need one person to have an insight, and then and kind of going back to our own unique reference point, I guess not this unique, but our own reference point was that Rohini suddenly showed up from a place of understanding. She was showing up from a place of compassion, more importantly. So if I'm all caught up, and here's my wife still remaining in a place of compassion, what ultimately happened for me was that I started to sort of maybe think, I started, it was almost like a mirror was being held up to me. And here I am kind of being an absolute dickhead. And here is my wife showing up from a place of compassion. She's kind of, using language. I don't know, maybe you did use language to this extent, or maybe this is something that started to emerge for me, is like, well, if she's seeing me through eyes of compassion in this moment where I'm caught up, maybe I am caught up, maybe I need to look at myself here. Mm-hmm. And I think that I started to do it. And, in a sense, there was nothing for my ego to get a hold of, to fight. She's showing up from compassion. This is all water off a duck's back in terms of all that I can throw at her from this state of mind. Nothing is landing because all I'm seeing and witnessing is eyes of compassion. So in a sense, it's like, what am I supposed to do with that? There's nothing for me to engage with. And I think ultimately that's what started to unfold for me, was that, this mirror started to emerge in front of me. It's like, oh, wow, you're caught up. And maybe this is nothing to do with her. And I think that was the beginning of how our relationship came back to float, and where healing started to take a grip. And it was what she had seen. She saw my psychological innocence in that moment. And people can kind of misconstrue that as like, oh, well, does that mean I have to be a doormat? No, it means you have to really genuinely have an insight and be able to see it from a vantage point of compassion and show up from there. And when you do, the other person has really got nothing to engage with. And then for me, that's kind of how real healing begins in relationship, is someone is able to see the psychological innocence of a person that is suffering, and call it osmosis, call it what you will. But for me, we only really need one person to get it. And then the healing cannot be held back, as I see it.
Now, can I emphasize that one point that Angus said about the doormat piece? Because I think that's really crucial. I actually went from feeling like a victim, feeling like I was a doormat in the face of Angus's anger, to actually feeling the most free and empowered I'd ever felt in my life, because I could see that his anger was all about his state of mind, and it didn't penetrate. I didn't feel hurt by it. It wasn't like I felt like I was the victim of his behavior. I genuinely just saw, oh, he's, lost his mind in this moment. He's not okay. It's got nothing to do with me. So I felt this sense of liberation that I hadn't felt previously, because I had felt like a doormat previously. And that's why I was dragging him to every workshop and thing under the sun, because I didn't want to feel like a doormat. But I didn't realize that that was coming from inside of me, because his behavior at that point hadn't changed. But I felt completely different. I felt empowered. I felt liberated. I felt secure within myself. And so I just behaved naturally based on how I saw things. It wasn't that I was intentionally even trying to turn the other cheek. I just saw he wasn't okay. And so I responded to someone who was not okay. I didn't respond as someone who was feeling like a doormat. And every time I had responded like someone who felt like I was a doormat, things would escalate. Things would get worse in our relationship. And so it can be difficult for people to hear, because we're not advocating that people accept unacceptable behavior. We're not advocating that bullies should be allowed to be bullies. We're advocating for each person to find their inner authentic empowerment and to live life from that place. And I'm very grateful that our relationship played out in the way that it played out, and that we're together. Now we're doing this work together. I couldn't be happier in our marriage, and it keeps, deepening and getting better. But I trust that if that was not the direction that it needed to go, and we weren't together, that would have been fine too. And that what matters is that I found that empowerment within myself. The relationship took its course based on that. And that's what I really want to emphasize for anyone listening, is that we're pointing to that authentic inner empowerment that comes from really understanding where your suffering comes from on the emotional level, so that there can be greater freedom from that. And then addressing life and the circumstances of life from that place of empowerment. And we don't know what that would look like. It might look like a relationship ending. It might, look like lots of different things. But that piece of empowerment is the foundation from which to build.
And that's what they're paying their money for, right?
Yeah, of course.
They may think they're coming in to sort of, restore their marriage, but that's the insight. That's the game changer.
Yeah.
Yeah, it truly is. And what came to me when you were speaking is that when someone is seeing that, as you did, Rohini, when how you could see you been suffering before and now you didn't, and you were not doormat anymore, and in that moment we can start to see the suffering in other people. And it's the conditional thinking of other people who's not seeing it is like, yeah, but that's a bad person, they're not suffering, they are mean. Yeah, but people who are in love with themselves, in the feeling, they don't have any made up need to make someone else feel bad or make them other people suffer.
Exactly. Exactly. It always comes from suffering. And that's when we see that, we see the psychological innocence, and we see that everybody is always doing the best that they can based on the understanding that they have. It doesn't mean that we condone the behavior that they're doing, but we do see their psychological innocence to the best of our ability and recognize that that's what makes sense based on how they see things in life. And when that seeing changes, when the vantage point changes, then the behavior changes as a result of that. And that's when shifts really happen. And in a relationship, it really, like when Angus said, it only takes one person to change, because of the back and forth nature in a relationship. When one person is no longer a victim and really sees the psychological innocence of the partner, the dance has to change. We don't know what the dance is going to change to, but we know that they can't be in the old dance anymore, just like we couldn't be in the old dance anymore. Like Angus was saying all of the things that would normally get me to either cry or get angry, and none of that happened anymore. And so the dance changed, and he started to see himself and his behavior differently. There's no guarantee that would happen that way. Maybe it would have gone the other way. Maybe we wouldn't be together if it hadn't gone that way. But what matters is that the dance changes, and then you get to see, based on what shows up at that point, what the next steps are.
Yeah, the dance that changed for me, it was like I was in a dance studio with a giant mirror, just being able to see how ridiculous this dance has been that I've been doing for the last 10 years.
What kind of spandex do you have on?
I thought I had some rhythm here. But I mean, I think that for me is a great way to illustrate that point. Is I feel like there was nothing for me to engage with, because she's showing up from a place of compassion. So I started to become very aware of how my anger seems so inappropriate apart from anything else, and started to become more self-reflective on that front, and started ultimately to see my own suffering. If she's showing up from a place of compassion, that suggests that she's thinking I'm suffering. Oh my goodness, maybe I am.
Yeah.
And that became glaringly obvious to me. And for sure, that was a point where the relationship shifted to a better place.
And rather meeting me from the defense of anger, you could actually express your vulnerability like that. And we could communicate from that place of softness and vulnerability with each other, so that there was understanding of our sensitivities, understanding of our frailties, not a need for us to be different on that level, but an ability to understand and then accommodate what would work better, so that we were kinder to each other as a result.
Or we could have continued, if you hadn't seen or had that insight, we'd be back in that dance hall and me carrying on with absolutely no capacity to dance very well.
Yeah. And it's like when someone has the understanding and is starting to see their own suffering and also seeing that other people is struggling, or the other partner is struggling, or other person, it doesn't need to be in a partner relationship. Suddenly, more as a mirror, you say, is we help more or less. They will start seeing themselves, the true nature of themselves, the other party, and connecting with it in some way, I guess.
Yeah. And that's why when, like, with what happened with Angus and myself, like he was able to feel more of himself. He connected with his true nature, because that's what's natural for all of us.
Exactly.
It doesn't matter what training we've had, what paradigms we ascribe ourselves to. It's like, that's just who we are. Full stop.
Or period, as they say here in the US.
Exactly what I thought.
and it wants to express. It wants to come through. We all want to experience that. It's natural to each and every one of us.
Yeah, we all, as you said, Rohini, that we all have that as a reference point in ourselves. We all of us have experienced that connection with love and ease and well-being in some way. For some, it was a long time ago, because they never really, as I would say, reflected on it or noticed it, even when it probably was not that too long back. But
yeah. Good. So that's a big relief, isn't it? We can just relax and let ourselves be ourselves.
Yeah.
A big exhale.
Amen to that.
So thank you very much for this lovely conversation and guiding and pointing. And if people would like to come in contact with you or any programs and so on, how do they come in contact with you, first of all?
Well, probably the easiest way is just to go to our website, which is therewilders.org. And one of the programs that we have is a membership program that is just one of the things that we really enjoy participating in. And we also have a guide training program, and the guides in that training program offer one-on-one support to the members in the membership program. So it's a way to not only be part of a community, but also to receive one-on-one support if you'd like to experience that.
And sometime a late video that's been
Yes, that's right. It's not late, it's on time.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
That's right. We pulled it off.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, and then of course one-to-one coaching and so on with one of each of you, and also
exactly. We offer our couples intensives and individual intensives, and so all of the information.
And the website is a hub for all of that. So yeah.
That's lovely. Perfect. And I will, of course, put all the links in the show notes. And I really emphasize that please listen into the Rewilding Love podcast. It's a joy. It's a great journey. So if you would like to share some last words of wisdom, I guess, to our listeners, what would that be?
Well, I would say, get curious about that part of yourself that really wants to restore balance and harmony. That's something that is universal. And it's a great place to begin a personal inquiry, I think. I think it can only lead you in the right direction. And ultimately, that direction, for me, as I see it, is that you will see differently. You will be able to get a different vantage point to experience your own programming and conditioning that can take a hold so quickly. But once you start to see it for what it is, that is a game changer. So get curious. That would be my pearl of wisdom, if I can frame it that way.
And I would say follow the feeling of an open heart and see where it takes you.
Yeah, I like that better.
Condensed.
You could edit my bit out and just stick with that.
Thank you so much for this lovely time.
Thank
you, Daniel.
Lovely
time with you.
Yeah. Thank you for the opportunity.
Tack för att du har lyssnat på det här avsnittet. Är det så att du uppskattar den här podcasten så får du självklart dela den vidare till dem du tänker kan ha ett behov av att lyssna på den. Det finns också en möjlighet för dig att boka in sig på ett kostnadsfritt coachingsamtal med mig. Det finns inga förbehåll att du måste ha tankar om att bli coachad, utan du kanske har en frågeställning bara så här: det här skulle vara intressant att bolla med Daniel. Så kan jag hjälpa dig på något sätt så gör jag det mer än gärna. Skicka frågan till mig på daniel@humanchange.se. På hemsidan hittar du även videokursen Nyckeln till stressfrihet. Det är en videokurs som jag tillsammans med Angelica Almqvist har skapat. Och det är ett program då för dig som vill ha ett stressfriare liv. Och några vanliga effekter som man kan se efter det här är då minskad stress, oro, frustration och psykisk ohälsa. Ett ökat lugn, välbefinnande, sinnesro med mera. Tack!